And here we are. So welcome again to another talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. Happy to have you all. The topic of conversation tonight is, how do you think outside of the box when the box is the whole darn universe? And thinking outside of the box is very important. Let me tell you the thought that stimulated this. There is a book called Ender's Game, and it's a pretty good book. The author wrote several good books in that series, and then sort of went crazy and turned into a less pleasant human being. But back in the day, he wrote this book, and in it, the protagonist, a kid by the name of Ender, is in a military school. And this is a space opera, so it's in outer space. And they have a capture the flag game that they play. And you basically have two drawers and a giant room that is in 0G. And the two teams come boiling out the doors, and they're floating in the air and bouncing off the walls. And the object of the game is to capture the other team's gate. So it's a kind of capture the flag. And at a certain point in the book, Ender, the hero, realizes that as everybody's coming out of the gate, they are orienting themselves to a horizon that is the wall in between the two gates, as if that were the horizontal. And he notices that every single team does that. They all pick a horizon and act as if it were real, when, since it's 0G, there is no horizon. And in one moment, he makes this intellectual leap where he realizes that the other team's gate can be wherever he wants it to be. Good. Got a note from Kyle saying that her sound is working, and hopefully she will be popping back in, because every talk is better, Kyle. What can you say? She is the sane part of this team. But anyway, so Ender, making this leap, realizes that the whole concept of a horizon is completely artificial. And so he decides that the enemy's gate is not across anymore, it's down. And by this one simple leap of thinking outside of that particular box, he and his team end up winning every single game after that, because they no longer have to play by this gravitational rule that doesn't exist. And so there is this idea of a false horizon. And it got me thinking when I wrote an essay on this several years ago and ran across it again, and I'll probably put it up. And it got me thinking about this whole concept of the false horizon and asking myself, how many false horizons do I assume are acting on me? And they only are because I assume that they are. And that led me to figure out that, well, most of them. And so that gets us to tonight's talk, which is about, or tonight's discussion, because I'm hoping that each and every one of you will join in and actually stimulate the conversation.
So you want us to join in and do that? Well, first of all, hello everyone. Finally, I'm back. I was having some sound issues, but I seem to have sorted them out. Sorted now.
Yes. And now everything is better.
All right.
So here we are with this idea of the false horizon. And so how do you discover your false horizons? That becomes a really interesting thing. First of all, one of the best ways to discover your false horizons is find some people who you disagree with and listen to their view of reality. That in and of itself will show you where some of your horizons are, and then you can question them. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, it does.
So, the problem of the box, thinking outside the box, which is what finding the false horizons is that the box seems to be infinite. You know, where the box is the whole universe. And the trick of thinking outside of the whole universe can be a little bit crazy. And we lost Ilmar to family duties. Okay. So I have a few ideas I wrote down here. Let me pull up my notes. So one of our horizons is in language. And if we look at that, we notice that most of the time there is a conversation going on. And hopefully for most of you, it's a conversation of one. But it is going on, and it is a particular language. In Arabic, the term for this conversation, this language is called lasun. And what we're talking about is called lasun al-nafs, the language of the ego. And there's another language that happens, which is called lasun al-dat, which is the language of the essence. Nafs, N-A-F-S, and dot, D-H-A-T. And one could think of those two as two of the three forces that operate in the universe. And there is a third part that allows you to move from one to the other. And we call that wukuf. Wukuf literally means to pause or stop. And the only way to break the conversation of the ego is to create this stop. This this is a thing that we run into a lot. There are actually exercises that one used to do. One of my favorites is a movement exercise where people are going through various complex movements, and the teacher yells out at a certain point, "Wukuf," and everybody freezes in whatever position they're in, including positions where you have no balance, which is interesting. And the idea is to stop in between habitual postures, in between habitual movements, and to break that and give you that moment that interrupts the pattern of ongoing internal dialogue so that you can step from one horizon to another. Does that make sense, or am I getting way too esoteric?
Let's see what other people have to say.
Yeah, makes sense.
Dave
I
says
like
it makes sense.
Good, but I pay him to say that, so.
David. Dollar signs. Cha-ching.
Good. So then let us. The interesting thing about wukuf, which in English you would spell it W-U-K-U-F. In Arabic, it's 3 letters. Waw, kaf, fi. Kaf being the K, not the qaf, which is the Q. And the thing about Arabic is that every word in Arabic comes from a trilateral verb. A 3-letter verb that all of the other words are declined from. And so WKF can mean a lot of different things. And one of its meanings is awareness. So pause and awareness are connected together. And so the true wukuf is a pause that gives you a moment of pure awareness. And sometimes it's hard to do, especially in the midst of your brain jawing along.
And jaw along it does.
Yes, it does. Has your brain been jawing during this time of mystery and vanishment from the world?
Not too badly, but you know, blah, 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 blah. It happens.
Yes, it does happen. Okay. Dave asked, does the false horizon equate with a buffer in G's terminology? I don't think so. A buffer is an actual energetic thing. But it's probably, in thinking about it, it could very well be related. So let's set that one on the back burner while I contemplate it. So Mr. Gurdjieff does say about these two conversations, understanding is acquired, as I have already said, from the totality of information intentionally learned from personal experiencings, whereas knowledge is only the automatic remembrance of words in a certain sequence. Let me repeat that. Mm-hmm. Understanding is acquired, as I have already said, from the totality of information intentionally learned and from personal experiencings, whereas knowledge is only the automatic remembrance of words in a certain sequence. So here, Gurdjieff is making a distinction between these two states, the conversation of the ego and the conversation of the essence. This is something that a lot of people don't catch. If you it will depend, Aaron. Aaron asks, so understanding isn't transmissible? And that will depend on how you're defining understanding. Gurdjieff is making a some way artificial distinction between knowledge and understanding, so that he can make a delineation between ongoing egoic chatter and the actual aware experience. The conversations that you have in your head are the same conversations that you had yesterday. and the same conversations that you had last week and the same conversations that you had last month. They are literally a sequence of words that are almost as if they were recorded and then played back over and over and over again. And we don't notice it because we aren't really paying a lot of attention to it. But if you were to sit down and start making notes of the things that you say in your head, several things would happen. First thing that would happen is that you would stop talking to yourself in your head because your ego would want to hide from you. I always found that amusing. One of the greatest ways to get quiet in the inner world is to just sit there with a pad and paper getting ready to write down the first thing that you hear yourself say. And you just stop saying it. At least if you're me, that's the way it works. I have used this trick on more than one occasion. I've done the whole sitting Zen trying to shut my brain up, and it never worked. But give me a pad and paper and it's just gone. Does not want to talk to me when I want to listen. Funny how that works. So, if you were to do that, though, and if you were to do that over time, you would find that the conversation is substantially the same, and depressingly enough, has been substantially the same for most of your life. And that's what Mr. Gurdjieff talks about when he says just automatically remembering words in a sequence. This is what Sufis call nafs al-amara, the commanding self. The commanding self is almost entirely mechanical in nature, and it's just a series of instructions that you give yourself over and over and over again. Usually at a slightly subliminal level. And it keeps you inside the box. Now, when we talk about the universe that we live in, in the old days, we referred to this as the worlds. And that's an archaic usage. I prefer to refer to it as modes of perception. And there are two modes of perception that have to do with what we're talking about. The first is called afak, A-F-A-Q. And it means horizon or view. There's that horizon thing. And this is, in the sense, it refers to the phenomenal world as it is experienced by you. As it is given to your senses. The second world, afak is limited by the constraints on the senses.
If you want me to type that.
Sure. Type away.
Okay.
So your eyes only see in certain frequencies of light. Your ears only hear in certain frequencies of sound. You are capable of perceiving some stimulus on your skin and not perceiving others. Some substances will have a taste, some won't. All of these are determined by your physiology and what you have conditioned yourself to perceive or not perceive. Two things. But first, it's constrained by the senses, by what the senses can do. So, the second world, or the second mode of perception, is called anfus, A-N-F-U-S. It comes from the same root as nafs, or ego. Anfus is the internally constructed world of the ego, and it's made from your memories, your habits, your conditioning, and your learning. And Anfus is the veil through which we see life. So it projects stories onto what we get from the afak, from what we get through the senses. I'm seeing more questions coming up here. Let me see what we have.
From a bunch. No, wait, from.
Okay, I think. Yeah, Scott is onto something. Okay.
Did we answer Nancy's question?
No, we didn't. Nancy, I'm sorry. I'm a horrible person. I missed your question.
Okay, so Nancy asks, but what would some examples of false horizons be? Which is a good question. Thank you.
It's a very good question. Let me give you a classic one. You're walking down the street at night, and you see a group of young men coming towards you. And you notice that they all have really dark skin, and you become frightened and scared, and you start imagining all of these horrible things. And as you get closer, you notice all of a sudden that all of the boys are wearing Boy Scout uniforms, and they smile and they wave at you as they walk past. That is an example of creating a false horizon just by making an assumption of what you see. That false horizon is of dark-skinned people equal danger is one that here in the world that I'm living in is very, very common. And I can tell you that it doesn't hold true, because surprisingly, I walk up and down the streets where I live that have just a plethora of different colored people. And so far, knock on wood, nothing bad has happened. I get smiled at a lot. So that is an example of a false horizon. Assumptions that you make about how the world is without actual empirical experience showing you that that is true in this case.
Does that help at all, Nancy? Good.
Yeah. And we have lost Scott to family duties. What is up with these family duties?
God, responsible people. Ugh.
God, I tell you. I was responsible once. I didn't like it. Well, what can you do? Okay, there was other questions here. Does the false horizon buffer mastery plus, which is our other Michael, or the other Michael is our other Michael, and
Oh no,
yes.
Nancy. Yeah, for everyone, just to put out there, if we don't see your question, it's not because we don't want to answer it. You know, it might be just because things get a little bit hectic, you know, trying to manage everything, but it's definitely never intentional in terms of us ignoring you.
Yeah, I would rather ignore myself. So, Michael, yeah, I figured that was you, Michael. We have two Michaels, but I worked it out. So let me find your question again.
It's below,
Yeah.
just above Nancy's. He said, I was thinking about exercises where I need to be able to stop at any point.
I used to do this with my Tai Chi students. I would make them stop in between what were considered the postures. So here's a false horizon I have made them get rid of. The way Tai Chi is mostly taught these days is as a series of postures, and you move from one to the other. I'm going to say that this is actually not the case. The postures of Tai Chi only exist because Tai Chi was created before there were videos to watch the people who created it move. The postures are the least important part of the Tai Chi. The important part is the transition between the postures. That's where the cool stuff happens. The transitions between the postures are what make it an art. And so one of the ways to change people's perceptions, especially if they've learned one of the forms, like they've learned the Yang form or the Wu form or the Chen form, is to get them to stop in between postures and then move on. Because all of a sudden you have a whole different series of postures, if you think about it. Because what the Tai Chi postures are like this. I used to be an animator. And the way that we used to animate was with what was called keyframes. So you have, say, Bugs Bunny. We have him because I like Bugs Bunny. He is one of my favorite mythical characters. So here's Bugs, and you have a picture of him seeing Elmer Fudd bent over looking down the rabbit hole. And then, so that's what the keyframe artist draws. Then you have the next picture, which is Bugs Bunny kicking Elmer Fudd in the butt as he's bending over. Now, in between those pictures, which are the keyframes, the line artists draw all of the action that gets from seeing to kicking in the ass. What we have with the postures are the keyframes. And in order to learn the art, you have to have the interpolations between the keyframes. It used to be that that was what the teachers gave you, was the interpolations between the keyframes and the understanding of that. But that seems to have fallen by the wayside a great deal. Yes, like music. Music doesn't exist except for the silence between the notes. Michael, that is a perfect example, though a more strenuous one than I was thinking of. I wouldn't be surprised if I was a little nervous from reading Idries Shah. Forget about Idries Shah. Idries Shah is dead and gone. He was amusing while he was alive. He was one of the all-time great Sufi hucksters. Take everything he said with the small Siberian salt mine, and remember that he was basically a pulp fiction writer. The things I could tell you about old Idries. It pisses people off, though, because he's sort of an idol. He's a bot, an idol that is worshipped now. And we should class all of the icons. So how are we doing? Are we sort of kind of like making sense? We have a few yeses. Good. Okay, so when you have Anfus, the internal world of stories and conditioning and learning and habit and memory, and the phenomenal world as is given to the senses, you get this thing called hawa. Hawa means a container or a wrapper. And what the Anfus does is it wraps itself around the experience of the world through the senses, so that your sensory experience is always contained within the wrapper of your story. Those of you who've been hanging out with me for a while have probably at this point noticed a theme to this. The stories that you tell yourself are the horizon that you have created. Think about that. The stories that you tell yourself are the horizon that you create, that keeps you thinking that the door is across from you rather than anywhere you want it to be. So, at this point, I'm going to invite someone, anyone, to ask a question that will give me the direction that I need to go in this. I need that sound that you get on the game shows, you know, okay. Dave has a question.
Yes, I'll read it. Finding or seeking out false horizons is an opportunity for a shock to appear, at least in a positive learning experience. Yes?
Yes.
As they could be viewed as a storehouse of latent potential.
Yes. As a matter of fact, every time you discover a false horizon, it is a shock to the. It is a shock to the process. It is that something that is coming in from the outside that's changing everything. So most definitely, yes, you are dealing with a positive shock that can allow for transformation. That's the whole value of doing this, is that it will transform you. If you learn that your horizons are artificially generated for the most part, you don't have to play by those horizons anymore. And then life gets interesting. There are some horizons that are real, like gravity works. You know, walls remain solid, at least till we get very, very high up on the whole ray of creation. I haven't gotten there myself, so I constantly remind myself that walls are solid and remember to open up the door before I walk through. Otherwise, things get interesting. So.
Okay.
Yes, even gravity is only relevant to certain situations. Yeah, and one of those situations is being on a giant ball of dirt. So, as long as we're here, that is a true horizon. There is no point in your life where gravity does not come into play. Unless you're an astronaut, and then you get to experience the lack of gravity, which is probably the other side of the coin. But for us earthbound mortals, think about it. Right now, if you let your mind be aware of it, you know exactly the direction of the center of the earth. And you always do. And you always know where your body is in relation to that center. Oh, trust me, in skydiving, gravity is really relevant. You have the illusion of flying. You have the illusion of lack of gravity in free fall. But It's an illusion. The gravity is still real. And if you think that it's not real, you might forget to open your chute, in which case you discover that the gravity is real. So Nancy says, would you take this, Kyle, and give us what Nancy says?
Sure, I'll read it. Okay, so Nancy contributes that one possible false horizon that she's noticed is that, at least in internet arguments, that she's very concerned with people being too harsh. And she runs up against people who are very concerned about excessive kindness. And she suggests that we're probably all overdoing it.
Okay. Probably everything on the internet, including this talk, is a false horizon. The internet is like Knopf's squared. It's as if you distilled the quintessential essence of ego and put it into electronic form and threw it out into the world. The internet is the demonstration that I most often think of the world of 96 laws on the ray of creation. The level of 96 levels of constraint upon being, where everything is entirely mechanical. You can go into an internet forum and within 5 minutes of reading posts, know exactly how every single person there is going to respond to every single stimulus. It's a little scary.
So Michael says, isn't that true of any dialogue? The horizon is limited by the group having the dialogue.
It is probably more true when you remove a lot of the factors that make you more conscious in a dialogue. To me, the internet often seems like just this constant road rage going on because people are not connected to what they're doing, nor are they accountable. Yes, it removes the verbal and nonverbal cues, because remember, most of this is going on in text. Very few people actually do what we're doing. Right now, we can all dialogue. You all have your microphones off, but that's not required. You can all turn them on and we can have a conversation. We can see each other. This is not usual. This is, I think, incrementally better, and it is one of the things that gives me hope that there might be some actual use to this darn internet thing that the kids are all doing now.
Yeah, I believe it, Nancy. They're definitely, I mean, these arguments online are definitely flow chartable.
Yes. And they're entirely mechanical. Yeah, I used to run, and it's still not let it go because I don't want anybody else using the name just yet. I used to run this group called Sufi Studies. It was the longest running Sufi-oriented email list group in the world in its time. And the reason I was running it is my teacher assigned me to do it. He said, learn about this internet thing. Can we use it? And so I ran this group, and I came to the conclusion that it was absolutely impossible for me anyway to teach anything to people in a group like that. Now, things have evolved greatly since then, and I think that it is more it is more probable that actual teaching can go on. I find myself hopeful. And so I would suggest that I actually created a false horizon from the experience of running an email chat group. And some of my experiences in the last several months, basically since Steve conned me into doing the Enneagram workshop that we did together, the Ultimate Enneagram, tricked me into it. And yet it showed me that you could actually effectively teach some of this material, which is why we're sitting here today and doing this particular iteration of cyber Sufi teaching, for lack of a better term, or cyber fourth way teaching, or cyber whatever the hell I'm doing teaching. And we seem to have some actual awake conversations, which is, I am pleased. So back to my notes for a second here to make sure that I have not forgotten anything. Okay, we've talked about that. So studying people who have thought outside the box is one way to begin to learn how to make those leaps yourself. So who here is familiar with Harry Partch?
You want to tell us about Harry Partch?
I guess I'm going to have to. Harry Partch was a musician.
Oh, okay. Someone
yes,
knows.
Someone knows. Yes, he is interesting in that he created his own musical more than scales. He created his own music and his own instruments to play it, and it was pretty radical. Some of it is slightly cacophonous, but a lot of it was very interesting to listen to. And he did these things by questioning why things had to be arranged in the way they were. So he's an example of somebody who seriously thought outside the box. And of course, the archetypal thinking outside the box guy is Buckminster Fuller. Y'all know Buckminster Fuller, right?
We mentioned him a little bit last week too. Oops. Yep. So, Buckminster Fuller.
Buckminster Fuller. He thought out of the box in the most serious way possible. In that he looked at it and said, "Why a box? Let's make our dwelling round." And he gave us the dome. So that's one way. Start looking at people who habitually thought outside the box. A lot of you guys are involved in one form of body work or another. So, look at Moshe Feldenkrais or F. Matthias Alexander, Ida Rolf, any of those people, and see how they looked differently at the body. And that gets us into quantitative versus qualitative. So in order to think outside the box, most of the time we're in the box and we think, oh, bigger box, more box, less box. That's all quantitative change. I got this concept originally way back in college when my anthropology teacher, for some reason best known only to her, decided that we had to study Teilhard de Chardin, who admittedly did some good work in archaeology. before his career was ruined because he took the Piltdown Man seriously. And if you know that story, it was some bones found in England, and they thought that it was the missing link. And Chardin, who was a very famous guy, threw his weight behind this, and it turned out to be a hoax, and it ruined him, which is too bad because he was brilliant. And he noticed that evolutionarily, evolution seemed to take this pattern of, oh, we're going to have quantitative change up until we can't have it anymore. And then something else has to happen. And what has to happen is a qualitative change. So you get matter that is more and more complex, starting with the simple hydrogen atom and working up to the most complex of all molecules, which is pretty much DNA. DNA is incredibly complex as a molecule. When you reach the absolute level of complexity, something has to change. And of course, the qualitative change that happened in our neck of the universe is life. All of a sudden, that which was not alive became alive. That's a major qualitative change if you think about it. So life gets more and more complex. You get single cell organisms that are as complex as they can get with, all of the energy factories that go on within a cell. And so they're the only thing they can do is start ganging up together. They form gangs. So you have these single cell organisms that get together and form gangs like sponges and corals and all like that. That keeps going until you get actual animals, which are a gang of cells that are controlled by a meta consciousness of some sort. So the consciousness of a rock is pretty minuscule. The consciousness of but some scientists would argue that there is a seed of consciousness within a rock. So the consciousness of single-celled organisms is not as strong as the consciousness of multi-celled organisms. The consciousness of plants is probably not as strong as the consciousness of animals. I say probably because I've talked to some pretty damn smart redwood trees in my time, but there may have been mushrooms involved. I don't know.
Again, the involvement of another plant with
another plant. Yeah, mushrooms are very smart.
Yes.
But this qualitative change happens at certain points. And this is where it gets weird. So self-consciousness was a qualitative change. And it happened somewhere around Homo erectus, probably. If you look at our closest relatives, the chimpanzee, they're very near what Homo erectus was. They have a certain amount of consciousness, a certain amount of intelligence that is qualitatively different than the intelligence of even a pig or a dog, which are pretty smart animals. So the primates made a leap, and then you get us, Homo sapien sapien, which means the thinking man. Not that we're arrogant or anything.
Not at all. No.
Not at all. And we should be making a qualitative change, and yet we don't.
Do we think too much, maybe?
Well, no, thinking too much says that. I mean, we are at the point following that particular map, which has held pretty much true for the last several million years, that we should be making a qualitative change. We should have been making a qualitative change for about 8,000 to 6,000 years. And yet we don't. We are not making the qualitative change. Why do you think that is? Dave mentioned something about it earlier on. A bacteria cannot see animals, but an animal can see bacteria. In reply to Nancy's question.
What do you mean by see?
Perceive.
Perceive, yeah.
Technology is not that qualitative change. No, it could be perhaps, but it doesn't seem to be. Qualitative change is a true change in state. So far, it has
So Nancy added a comment or two. No, she added one. Michael.
Yeah, we're getting some good questions and answers here.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a qualitative change happened, and well, actually, I would go so far to say that the qualitative change has happened, but it happens only in a very, very few members of the species, oftentimes either accidentally or through really, really hard work. But the majority of the species is stuck at the pre-change level where they shouldn't be. My sense, Michael, is that technology is part of the quantity, not the quality. And too much comfort, that's probably part of it. Yeah, I would say the current generation is not the natives of this technology. They are the victims of it.
Mm.
This technology does not seem to be doing us a whole lot of good from the point of view of conscious evolution. As a matter of fact, my experience is that the technology and the present generation is more conditioned and identified with the technology than anybody else. And thereby they have no attention span. They have no ability to focus on the outside world for any length of time. They live entirely in the anfus because of this technology. There is about to be a bunch of noise as my housemates come crashing through. Ignore the people behind the curtain.
Hey.
Well, don't ignore Vince.
Yeah.
Hi, Ben.
Kyle says hi. Dave says hi too. Yeah, I don't see technology as evolving us. I see it as devolving us. I see it as making us more and more robotic and less capable.
Do you think that's
and maybe I'm just getting old and I'm shaking my fist, yelling, "Get off my lawn!" at all these kids.
Yeah, maybe a little bit, but
Yeah,
I do think
be.
there's something to that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, Nancy, you could be very, very correct about that.
So Nancy says part of the problem is not having good enough people to share the technology with. Constant praise and criticism. I mean, I do feel that how we use it is this is me speaking. I do feel like our relationship to technology is definitely based on the people we use it alongside and what we observe other people doing. And it's also a matter of, active choice, like whether we interact consciously or we just kind of react to everything that comes up. And things like Facebook definitely train us to react to things.
Yep, that's the case.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as far as I can tell, technology is not leading to higher consciousness.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I like technology. I wouldn't be here without technology, or I would be much more messed up than I actually am. You know, technology allows me to actually see you guys. It allows me to exist without pain. All of these wonderful things that technology does. But the communications technology that we exist in now seems to be making us stupider.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Michael. Facebook encourages echo chambers
Yes.
and reinforces false horizons. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying about
Yeah,
react.
Facebook does that. Google does that. YouTube does that. Everything out there that you use for communicating, Instagram, they all do that. They all have their metrics and they all feed you what they think you want. If we could ever develop a metric that gave you what you needed instead of what you wanted, life would be wonderful or painful or both.
Sometimes it's not even what you want. It's just what provokes you, what gets you in engagement mode so that you'll keep using whatever the product is. But, you know, chemically, I guess you want it. Yeah. So.
Yeah, the chemistry, the brain chemistry of social media is fascinating, and I don't think we're going to know as much about it as we should for a while yet.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to be hitting a lot of the same serotonin receptors that things like cocaine hits.
Yeah.
At this point, do all feel free to turn on your microphones and let us talk.
We're at that point where I think it would be great to have everyone just pop in.
Yeah, because it is silly for us to be reading your text when we're saying text is maybe not the way to go.
Well, listen, can I speak something? Can I say something?
Yeah, of course you can.
I think technology can be useful to those who have a higher conscience if they use it in the proper way. You know, you have to be selective in the kind of technology that you have, and then selective in the way that you use it.
Yes. And technology is a catch-all term. I mean, I was using technology today and it did not set me back.
Well, I'm talking about specifically right now social media.
Yes.
You know? So I'm talking about Facebook, Instagram, Google, etc., all those sort of things. It depends upon how you use it, you know? Mm-hmm. You have to use it judiciously. You have to just be careful. Just be careful and choose your words carefully. Think before you write or speak or act, and think about how that's going to be perceived by the other person. Try and be as clear as possible as if you're talking to them in person.
Well,
you know, face to face.
A lot of what's changed has been the scope. We don't have the filters that we used to have on information.
Mm-hmm.
Because things are being, you know, it used to be to get something out to a broad audience, it required a lot of steps that act as filters that qualified the quality of the information. Now anybody can reach the entire world instantly. They say something that triggers a nerve, even if it is not backed up by actual facts.
Mm-hmm.
People want to say something that goes viral, you know, but there's nobody double checking those pieces. And that's kind of where we're at with this, is that we don't have those filters. We're needing to evolve our own filters for the information, when it used to be the process of passing around the information did those filters. So it's a chunk of it. It's how you use the technology.
Yep, that's definitely true. You know, a hammer can either drive a nail or bust somebody's head.
Mm-hmm.
The old filter. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, the old filters were filtering out some true things, though, too. You know, it,
Oh yeah.
it used to be possible to pretend that gay people didn't exist
Mhm.
or that the police were trustworthy. And, you know, a certain, you know, some stuff has broken through. So,
You know, but it's necessary that we do more of our own filtering. And yes, there's always the possibility that somebody is trying to present to you a false horizon.
Yeah, probably everybody but me is trying to present to you a false horizon.
You just don't consciously admit it. Even to yourself.
So, according to the tradition, somewhere 8,000 to 6,000 years ago, something happened that broke our ongoing evolution. And Dave mentioned buffers. And the way Mr. Gurdjieff tells it, and this is in an allegory called Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, Beelzebub not being the devil, but a space traveler who had just finished visiting planet Earth and was telling him about the strange three-brained beings who lived there. And he said that at one point, there was what he called the catastrophe, not according to law, by which men could live together, by which the majority of men could live together more or less comfortably only as masters and slaves. He said that all in one breath. I can't do that. He was much more talented than me. But that was what he called it. And it seems to be a true thing. We look at what went on 8,000 to 6,000 years ago, and what we see is the emergence of agriculture, the emergence of land ownership, and the emergence of kingship in society. Kingship is, think about it. How weird does it have to be for people to have kings? The king is the guy who you must obey even if you don't want to. Think about that. We accept that. We think, oh, there are authorities over us that we must obey even if we don't want to. The king can tell us to go to war, and we must all go to war. The king can say, go and wipe out that village because they pissed me off. And we all go and we wipe out the village unquestioningly.
Mm.
Kingship and this disaster go hand in hand. And you all have heard me harp on, rant about, and generally shake my fist at the whole idea of human adulthood and the lack thereof in our species. Somewhere about 6,000 years ago, we were domesticated as a species. Domestication means that we retain juvenile traits into adulthood. That's how you domesticate any animal, is you basically keep the animal in a childlike state. Domestic cattle can be moved around by human beings because they respond the same way that calves do. And if you read the accounts of the wild Arach, the wild cattle of Europe, they didn't do that. You could not herd them. If you tried to herd them, they would come over and stomp you into a bloody puddle. You know, it's like, go try and ride a zebra. They look just like donkeys with stripes. But
Yeah.
a zebra will kill you if you try and ride it. They are not domesticated. But you could put a saddle on a zebra colt before it grows up. So, human beings are domesticated primates. I'm pretty sure that we domesticated ourselves. I don't think that space aliens came and domesticated us. That defies Occam's razor, at least for me. And yes, Aaron, it is a very bizarre concept, but I think that this is what stopped our natural evolution to the next level of wherever it is that we're going, our next level of awakening as a species. Mr. Gurdjieff, in his story, said that the angels installed what he called the Kunda buffer in humans, and that it stopped the natural flow of energy through people to facilitate their evolution. He then went on to say, and then they took it back out, finding that they no longer needed it because people had been trained to do it to themselves. And that's what I find interesting. We have been trained to do it to ourselves. We have been trained to keep ourselves in a state of neotenous existence where we never become fully mature human beings. And only by doing that can we move to the next qualitative change in consciousness. So those few people who actually break out of the chrysalis stage and move into the adult stage of humanity have the possibility of the qualitative leap. But as long as we remain domesticated primates, we don't get to do that. I try not to say that out loud. That this must mean that I like you guys, because this is not something that I try and tell people, because mostly it upsets them terribly. And then, you know, the pitchforks come out and the torches, and there's the bonfire in the town square, and they're not looking at marshmallows, they're looking at you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you were just talking about people concealing that they're Sufis because it's not safe to be public.
Yes. Yeah, and I still say the best way to conceal yourself as a Sufi is you start rumors that every Wahhabi out there is actually a secret Sufi. This is my favorite thing to do.
So Wahhabis are like, you know, the angry fundamentalists that get stereotyped in the media. So
Yes. And rightly so.
Yep.
We don't like Wahhabis. They have no sense of humor. They don't
No,
like
they
people,
don't.
so fuck them.
So, Aaron has a question, and I also
Yes.
want to acknowledge that people's time is valuable. So if you're not able to stick around, given that we're
Yeah.
a bit over 10
Yeah,
minutes
we're
past the hour, that's
11
okay.
minutes over. Yeah. That's because we're having fun, I think.
Yeah,
I'm
I just
having
want to
fun.
know that
Yeah.
I want people to understand that if you
Yeah.
need to go, that is completely okay.
Yes. Our feelings will not be hurt much. So Aaron says, it is a very bizarre concept, the concept of kingship. Do you think that the formation of specific occupations versus necessary skills for survival facilitates this domestication? That is a very good observation. Because I think, yes, specialization facilitates domestication. This is not to say that people should not be good at one thing over another. You know, there are things that I'm very good at and I love doing. If I was living in a tribal society, I would be the guy making the arrowheads for everybody, because I love, you know, flaking obsidian. But I can also go out and catch my food. I can yeah, My Ishmael. That's a good book. Robert Heinlein said that a human being should be able to do, you know, should fix a car, change a baby, cook a meal, lead, follow, all of these things. He says specialization is for insects. And it's true. We as a species evolved because we are generalists. Because each of us can do a number of things. And while there are some things that some of us will be better at than others, we all used to be able to do all of the things.
Well, if you go back to about Aristotle, you actually get to the point where the sum total of human knowledge could be held in a person's head. And since then, we can't even maintain just what we know about the universe and how it works in a single person's level of generalist knowledge.
Yeah,
And,
that is probably true. And
what if hierarchies in general are part of what you're talking about? We developed the hierarchies of social interactions and organization structures of cities, tribes, and governments. And we've
Yeah.
also got the amount of information we're trying to manage and the technologies result in specializations. Is the technology itself that trigger
it lends itself to it, and there is still a place for generalism even in today's society. Right now, where I'm sitting, if the infrastructure collapsed, 3/4 of the population would be dead within a week.
Yeah, there is still generalization. I do a lot of it because I understand a great deal of technologies, and so I can talk to the people who have specialized in certain technologies, and show how things can cross pollinate.
Yeah.
But even
So
more,
I want to address this hierarchical thing, because this is a thing. And Kyle and I went through this when she first became my student.
Yep.
In the way, there is no hierarchy. There is sometimes the appearance of hierarchy, but there cannot actually be a hierarchy because, and this is very important, pay attention because there will be a test. Real communication is only possible between equals. Let me repeat that. Real communication is only possible between equals. The moment you get a hierarchical system, communication breaks down. The more hierarchical the system, the more communication breaks down, because those on the bottom will only tell those on the top what they think they want to hear. They will not tell them the truth. And those on the top will only want to hear what they want to hear, not the truth. Within the school, and when I say the school, I'm talking about not just the little school here, but the school, capital letters, there is no hierarchy. There are people who do certain jobs, but fundamentally everybody understands that we are equal to each other and no one is above the next. And Kyle, having come out of the traditional Sufi thing where everybody's kissing the sheikh's robes, took a week or two to get that through her head.
It's challenging, especially when that's so ingrained that, you know, even in day-to-day life, you are taught that there's certain people who are in roles of authority, and your job essentially is to, you know, in a twisted way, sometimes uphold their authority for them. And that is, yeah, it stunts your own growth to kind of uphold that. And to lose sight of your own authority.
Yes. And I would like to point out that when you begin to really embrace this concept, our level of communication got a whole hell of a lot better.
Yeah, in the beginning I was really shy and I wanted to share a lot, but it was challenging and scary because I had the sense that I didn't know if it was okay to open up like that or to to see Mushtaq as an equal, yeah. To accept him as an equal, accept myself as an equal to him.
Yeah, that's the big one. Accepting yourself as an equal to me was the moment of your first moment of qualitative change.
Yeah. It can be panic inducing to feel like, oh shit, that means I'm responsible for myself, you know, that kind of thing.
Yep. And you don't get to follow me blindly,
No.
because that would, after all, literally be the blind following the blind, or the blind leading the blind.
Right. Yeah. So we've had a few comments here.
A few comments.
I
What
think
do
they're
we
from
got?
before. Like Aaron said, yeah, specialization dramatically changed our interaction with the environment. Yes.
Yeah. Which is why I think that we are getting there is the rewilding movement, which I have watched delightedly for the last decade or so, of people embracing their own ability to do things that they never thought that they could do, to go out and gobble up bugs in the wilderness, as we used to say.
Not there yet, but you know.
You know, you talked about how the hierarchy causes, for example, the student to limit themselves because they think higher up the hierarchy. But it also works the other direction as well, because the
Oh,
people
absolutely.
don't-
Teachers in a hierarchy are blind and deaf, and oftentimes living in utter fantasy worlds.
I feel
And
like
you see
that's
that.
also,
yeah.
Go ahead, please.
I was just gonna say, like, that's a lot of pressure on the quote unquote authority figure too, to uphold that role and carry everybody else.
Yeah, teachers tend to develop what's called the burden of omniscience, wherein you are expected to know everything, and you cannot ever be wrong about anything.
But you also
And
you can also get
go
it.
ahead.
You can get it in terms of leadership roles, where the underlings are passing up what the leaders want to hear, and so the leaders begin to believe that they know everything.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Therefore, the whole organization can go in incorrect directions because
Yeah.
of the self-reference.
And this is where specialization bites you in the ass, because the main reason that the underlings are telling the leader what they think the leader wants to hear is because if the leader gets rid of them, if you like get fired from your job, you might starve. You don't have the things that people need to survive, and you don't have a means of getting them. In my life, I have never worried about that. No matter what circumstances I found myself in, I've never gone for government assistance, never gone for food stamps, because, well, when I was in college, for instance, I was a poor boy. Had to work all the time just to make enough money to make tuition, which wasn't all that much back then. So I fed myself by hunting and gathering. You know, I dined well. I dined on venison and quail and rabbit and all manner of wonderful things, and squirrel, which is not as tasty, but plentiful. And all it takes is a 22 rifle, and you can gather all of that kind of stuff. You don't even need that. And that's because I was raised in that milieu. So I am perfectly comfortable with the thought of going, oh, all of the supermarkets are closed. I'm going to split out of this city and go into the hinterlands as quickly as possible, and I'm going to live off the land. And I can do that. That means that if my boss says, well, we're going to fire you if you don't do exactly what we say, I'm going to be telling him to go screw himself, because I am not beholden to him. And that is something that we have lost. The whole idea of masters and slaves is really quite important, because most of the people out there are in fact slaves, because they do not have the agency to take care of themselves without somebody providing for them. You know, we are just no longer chattel slaves, we're wage slaves, and we're debt slaves. We went from chattel slavery in the mid 1900s to debt slavery in the mid 1800s for chattel slavery, to the mid 1900s for wage slavery, and now in the 2000s we're going into debt slavery.
Mm.
Talk to anybody Kyle's age and ask them, how much do you owe the government in student loans? And then figure out how long it will take to pay that back. And it's basically your lifetime.
Yeah, it's true.
So
let's see. Nancy has commented that maybe the next step requires tech, which will enable all the billions of people to live off the grid.
We probably already have that tech.
We already have the tech, but
It hasn't
Yeah.
become pervasive. It's not ubiquitous.
yeah.
Yeah. Most of the tech that we need to do that is between our ears. So we've gone 25 minutes over. We will now have last questions for anybody who has last questions, because I know that Vivian is going to have to go to work soon, because it's
Yes.
already morning where she is. And Kyle's going to have to go to sleep soon because it's late there.
I had an interesting weekend, so I could use the sleep.
Yes. Yay for interesting weekends.
Mm-hmm.
So any last questions? Any last answers? Come on, somebody's got to have an answer somewhere.
42.
Wrong answer.
But did you hear the background of where 42 came from?
I'm sorry, that was kind of garbled.
Did you hear the background of where 42 became the answer?
I vaguely remember.
42 is the answer code for an asterisk. Asterisk in computer terminology.
Yeah, the ASCII code.
It means anything
Yep.
or everything.
Yep. I remember back in the days of Unix and DOS using that asterisk for doing all manner of searches on my hard drive.
Mm,
All right, other answers. And there was silence.
Sorta. Not silent over there.
So then my last question.
Glad to hear it's been a good session for you, Vivian.
Yes,
Mhm.
because that was going to be my question. Question is this something that you found of use? Because it's a little bit of a departure from what I have been doing. So I need your feedback as to whether or not this is a direction that is useful for me to take you guys.
I'm finding it useful.
Good,
Me too.
good.
Yay.
We are in agreement. All right. Well,
Well
I am
said,
going
yep.
to end the broadcast section and say thank you to all of you for participating and for putting up with me and all of my strange ideas. As always, it is greatly appreciated to have somebody to talk to besides just staring into the computer. So I personally am very much enjoying this format of being able to actually converse with you guys. And so, adios.
Good luck.